a forgotten masterpiece of colonial engineering. Eritrea's spectacular railway climbs over 7,000 feet as it twists and turns through endless gorges and tunnels on its journey through the Horn of Africa. But before starting this account of a truly remarkable line, it's as well to show exactly where Eritrea is and relate something of its fascinating history. Unless your home atlas is bang up to date, Eritrea probably won't appear, having been officially part of Ethiopia for nearly 40 years up until 1991. Situated at the northern end of East Africa's famous Rift Valley, the mountain areas of this scenic country are high enough to enjoy a perfect climate all year round. The neat, well-ordered capital Asmara is one of the safest, cleanest, and most attractive capital cities in Africa. It's the legacy of half a century of Italian colonial rule, which ended in 1941. Mussolini proclaimed his African possessions, Libya, Eritrea, and Somaliland, the Second Roman Empire, and proudly set his stamp on Asmara, Eritrea's capital. Centerpiece was the cathedral, consecrated in 1923. Built in the classic Lombard Romanesque style, it was designed to make Italian settlers feel at home. Mussolini was one of its benefactors. But the Italian dictator didn't want his African capital regarded as just a cozy backwater. Young architects were encouraged to come out in the 1930s and create an avant-garde image. Their efforts resulted in a fascinating collection of Art Deco architecture that's left its mark even today. Some of the buildings became quite famous, especially the unique Fiat garage with its broad, unsupported canopies. Just as we filmed the rather splendid Imperial Cinema, a passing street vendor, with a good sense of timing, sold us this coin of the pompous helmeted Duce in his heyday. Having entered the Second World War on Hitler's side, Italy now had a hostile neighbour in British-controlled Sudan. The British invaded in 1941, and the 2-month campaign ended here in Keren Gorge, when the Italians were defeated after a hard battle. The commanding Italian general was killed, as were many British and their allies. The war cemeteries of both sides remain well tended in this remote corner of Africa. The British administration lasted 11 years. There are few visible British relics now, apart from the cemeteries. But the occasional English road sign can still be found, and greatest surprise of all, an old double-decker bus. It's a wartime austerity model, based on a Guy lorry, and originally built for the Northern General Omnibus Company on Tyneside. It somehow ended up here, where the managers of an Asmara textile factory use it to carry their workforce. British administration officially ended in 1952, when the United Nations federated the territory with Ethiopia, and Eritrea was airbrushed off the map of Africa. The local population felt betrayed because they had a strong case for independence. This sowed the seeds of resistance, which finally escalated into a full-scale war of independence when Ethiopia's Soviet-backed Mengistu regime took control in 1974. A major casualty of the conflict was Eritrea's railway. Being in government hands, it was an obvious target for the independence fighters and was eventually forced to close in 1975. When a train was hijacked, passengers were ordered out and the locomotive driven off the track. In this 1970 incident, 2 rail cars had evidently gone before at the same spot. Bridges were blown up, stations attacked, and much of the track ripped up by both sides for use as building material in army bunkers. Rolling stock recovered from the sabotaged trains soon turned the stations into railway graveyards. Surviving locomotives were dumped in Asmara's loco shed, apparently beyond repair, while a large heap of locomotive pieces took shape outside in the yard. The seemingly endless war dragged on until 1991, when Eritrea finally expelled the Ethiopians. But strange things happen in Africa, and none stranger than here in Eritrea. In 1994, to everyone's amazement and the delight of rail fans, the government decided to rebuild the railway. As a symbolic act of patriotism, they wanted to restore the nation's former lifeline from the port of Massawa on the Red Sea up to the capital in the mountains. But to rebuild it was a huge task. Gaps had to be filled where opposing sides in the war had stolen the rails. A missing bridge over the main road to the coast had to be replaced, while other bridges were still intact but heavily mined. And to run trains again, they had to make the best of what was left after 25 years' damage and neglect. Former locomotive staff, by now in their 70s and 80s, were brought out of retirement to get the locos serviceable again. This workshop fitter is Abraham Ikwa, 74 years old. Receiving finishing touches in Asmara after its first overhaul for 30 years is number 55, an Italian loco built in 1938. This articulated 8-wheeler with twin 4-coupled drive was ideally suited for the sharp curvature of this 95-centimetre gauge railway. It's a compound which uses high-pressure steam in the rear pair of cylinders. The exhaust from these powers the larger low-pressure cylinders for the front set of driving wheels. These form a powered bogie which pulls the loco smoothly round the curves. The type is known as a Mallet, after a Frenchman, Anatole Mallet, who invented it in the 19th century. We shall now join number 55 as she gets ready for a local trip which will take it 22 kilometers down to the hill town of Nefasit. This is the most dramatic section of the line and had only just been reopened when we filmed it in 2002. No brochure could exaggerate its charms, and everyone on board was simply lost for words. Students of mechanical engineering will appreciate the articulation of these sturdy machines as seen from the front carriage. The loose-mounted blast pipe directs exhaust steam upwards to create the draft in the chimney and remains effective even when pulled sideways as the front bogie lurches around the curves. Right up until the 1970s, when it closed, the railway was an important national carrier with heavy freight traffic. Now everything has to go on the parallel mountain road with its dangerous hairpin bends. But it has a poor safety record, and the need for the railway is all too obvious in places. Another important job in the reconstruction was to restore the water supply at all the stations. To save weight, the locos have fairly small water tanks and need frequent topping up. The local population benefits too. Nevesit was reached in the typical thick fog that suddenly appears on the escarpment without warning. But the local populace seemed delighted at the train's reappearance and turned out en masse regardless. The next day saw a return to classic sunny views, so we went back to Nevesit to see the last section of the railway to be rebuilt. As many rails as possible were reclaimed from the old trenches where they had been taken in the fighting, and teams were still scouring the hills for more, creating dumps of recovered material at intervals along the track bed. There were no ready-made track panels to hand. Everything had to be assembled from scratch on site. The operation involved a work camp on wheels, which slowly crept its way down the mountain as the rails were laid. The reclaimed rails invariably came minus their bolts and fixings, and the expensively acquired replacements were carefully doled out. Eritrea's large conscript army, as yet not demobilized owing to continuing tensions with Ethiopia, was drafted in to help with the laborious task of attaching the rails to the sleepers. Crowbars were used to force the rails into alignment along the curves in the track bed. But on some parts of the line, the curves were so sharp it took more than a crowbar to get the rails to fit. Cue the Eritrean plate layer's secret weapon, the Italian patent rail bender. This makeshift treadmill forces the rail through pinch rollers adjusted to the required curvature. Once into their stride, 4 men can produce a curved rail in about 2 minutes. This simple but ingenious device from the earliest days of railways is still called by its Italian name, girarotaya. Across viaducts now cleared of their mines, the teams forged on. This massive concrete block by the track is another relic of Italy's grand designs of the 30s. On it once stood a 100-foot-high tower, one of the many supporting the great Asmara Cableway that strode across the Rift Valley like a colossus. 75 kilometers in length, it was claimed to be the world's largest cableway. It was opened in 1937 to carry bulk materials formerly carried by rail up to Asmara from the Red Sea coast. But it was only in operation until the Italian defeat in 1941. Disused for over 2 decades, it was eventually removed by the Ethiopians in 1963. On the main road, near Kala, replacing the missing overbridge was a simple enough job, but it was impossible for modern container trucks to pass under it. The solution here was to cut away the adjoining hillside so as to divert the road and create a level crossing. While the survey teams checked the alignment, the local truck drivers had to learn to slow down. With the track laid, the next task was to deliver ballast to create a firm bedding for the rails. Motive power for the work consisted of converted Russian lorries known as Ural, after the Ural Mountains. They had been captured from the Ethiopians during the fighting and adapted to run on rails. Below Kala, the mountain section ends at Ghinda, whence the rebuilding of the line down to the sea was completed in 1999. This is the major staging post on the railway, about halfway in travelling time, if not in distance. The newly restored shunting engine waiting in the yard is of a type specially designed for Eritrea by the Breeder Company in Italy in the 1920s. After 25 years' abandonment, Ghinda station is once again becoming a focus for the community. People here are market traders waiting for the local shuttle to arrive with produce from the valleys in the foothills. Only the older ones will remember the railway, while for most, waiting for a train is a novel experience. The landscape becomes more arid as the train approaches the coastal plain. Down here on the northern edge of the Great Danakil Depression, temperatures often exceed 40 degrees centigrade, and the transport of water assumes major importance. The railway ends here at Massawa, on the shores of the Red Sea, on the historic trade route of the Arab dhows to East Africa. Massawa was under Turkish control when the Italians arrived, but was ceded to them in 1882, though even today the town still retains a strong Arab atmosphere. The recent war took its toll on old Massawa, and many of its historic buildings were destroyed. The Italian bank that once served the commerce of the docks area is now just a shell. Overlooking the harbour is the half-destroyed former seaside residence of the Ethiopian emperor. Surprisingly untouched after years of bitter war, Haile Selassie's Lion of Judah still remains on the palace gate. The tracks of the former dockyard railway can still be seen, and the long-term plan is to restore the harbour line to get the railway back into the container freight business. In the meantime, the locals on the waterfront are getting increasingly accustomed to the sight of a train by the harbour, as chartered steam trips for tour groups become almost routine in the cool season, that is, when the temperature is only 37 degrees centigrade. By filming several different tour specials, we now present a composite record of the journey by steam up to Asmara, reproducing with a period train the journey made by a traveller in the 1930s, who's arrived by the weekly steamer from Italy. After threading its way past the harbour's edge, our train leaves the island and heads off across a second causeway to the mainland. The reopening of the railway means that Massawa's townsfolk will have to get used to the sound of trains once more, and remember to get out of the way when they approach. This is one of the small stations installed in readiness for the restoration of Massawa's commuter shuttle train. After a 20-kilometre run through Massawa's desert hinterland, we come to the line's longest bridge, with 14 arches over a dried riverbed on the approach to Dogali. Three times a week, a local goods train runs to Ghinda, normally using one of these early diesels supplied by Krupp of Germany in 1957. But they're troublesome to maintain, and steam often has to be substituted. This solitary column on the hill above Dogali commemorates those who died when Italy was trying to dominate the area in the 1880s. Ethiopia claimed the land as theirs and fought to keep the Italians out. A small Italian force was wiped out here in 1887, but a relief expedition shortly afterwards secured Italy the corridor to the mountains they wanted, and later the same year construction of the railway was started. The Italian colony of Eritrea was finally established by treaty in 1890, but it took 20 years to survey and construct the mountain section of the railway up to Asmara, finally reached in 1911, with an extension towards Sudan in the 1920s. Abandoned on the edge of the desert at Maya Tal is a large collection of wagons that clearly shows the problems faced here. Most of them are very old and too small for modern containers, so much investment will be needed to develop freight traffic. Also lying here is a small diesel loco. It would be ideal for local service in the plains, but too many parts are missing to consider restoring it. A period touch is the Italian builder's plate, showing not only the calendar year, but also a Roman numeral, denoting the 13th year of Mussolini's fascist rule. The concrete base at Maya Tal is further evidence of the old cableway which crossed the line here. These Mallet-type locomotives were built in Italy by the Ansaldo company, but the plate on the dome seems to be the wrong one, so they've erased the numbers. But on another unspoilt plate on the cab side, the number, date and fascist year 16 all appear together, a real collector's item. To be on the safe side, there are 2 coupling chains to attach the locos, but no continuous brakes. Each wagon is controlled by its own brakeman. The train now passes over one of the many fine viaducts on this well-engineered railway. The village of Damas is the next stop. For years now, it has only been accessible by a very rough dirt road, so its isolated inhabitants are naturally curious at the sudden appearance of a trainload of tourists. Here again, the army is well entrenched. From here onwards, a long stretch of the line keeps company with a dried riverbed and has no road access at all. During the last 25 years, camel haulage has re-established its ancient monopoly over the area. But now the traditional beast of burden will have to learn all over again to cope with the mechanical competition. When regular rail service resumes, scenes like this will become less common. Ghinda, at 70 kilometres, was the limit of this trip in 2002. A locomotive parade was laid on for the group's cameras. The braiders and Mallets were shuffled into position while one of the braiders was preparing to take the group another 5 kilometres up the line with just one coach. The whole proceeding made an unbelievable sight. 4 locos, all in steam together, on a railway that had been officially closed over 25 years before and subsequently dismantled. The parade over, it was time for braider number 10 to take over its tiny train. The moment the driver set off, however, it was clear all was not well. Steam and water were pouring out of the smoke box, indicating a major boiler tube failure. Number 8 then came to the rescue. The mountain section now started in earnest, with a ruling gradient of 3.5%, or 1 in 28. Normally only used for shunting, the little braider seemed to enjoy its brief mainline outing and tackled the grade with determination. Soldiers stationed at kilometre 75 had just been drafted here to finish off the line to Kala, 5 kilometres further on. This is one of several stations with no name, just the kilometre number. The trip officially ended here, and the braider locomotive retired to the soldiers' siding. But the group asked if they could go further. The line here hadn't been used for years, but it was agreed diesel could proceed with caution up towards Kala. The driver didn't seem too happy, however. The weeds grew higher and higher, and then came fallen rocks. Passengers gamely removed the first one, but after prodigious efforts, the next one couldn't be pushed clear. So the trip terminated here, and the relieved driver beat a hasty retreat. By 2003, the tracks above Ghinda had been restored, so this time a Mallet did the honours. Safety at level crossings is certain to become an issue in a country no longer aware of railways, but here the truck driver has stopped in plenty of time. The relentless 3.5% grade takes the line above Nefasit to another inaccessible stretch where the road lies on the opposite side of the mountain. Above 6,000 feet now, the train once more finds itself in the clouds. We emerge into the light at Arbaroba, 105 kilometers from Massawa. Here there is one of the few stations in original condition, still with its fretwork awning and Italian-style name. This is the most scenic bit of the railway, and it's worth the journey to the Horn of Africa just to see this part alone. It looks more like Calabria or Sardinia than Africa. Appearances certainly can be deceptive. The last water stop, with 12 kilometers to go to Asmara. This is Devil's Gate, on the approach to the summit of the railway at 7,500 feet. Approaching Asmara now, the train comes into the old station, now a road transport office, shortly due to revert to the railway. This was the first passenger train to arrive here for 28 years, but the crew showed no sign of the occasion, as though there had just been a short interruption of service. Inside the shed at Asmara, the locomotives included this rare bird, vintage small Mallet dating from 1915. It's the last survivor of a class used on several Italian railways before coming to Eritrea in the 1920s. If the line to the interior at Agodat ever reopens, this will be the engine for the job. There is also a separate diesel shop, where one of the two remaining Fiat rail cars awaits repair. The railway workshops have also been reactivated. In the foundry, there are many jobs to be done. A typical task is reprofiling a wheel after the pits on the surface have been filled. Everything is made here, such as bolts for renewing couplings, brake blocks for the wagons, etc. Self-sufficiency is the order of the day, and very little is imported. Here in the pattern shop, Asmara can boast the world's oldest railwayman.
Come si chiama?
Legash.
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 Ah, e quanti anni?
93.
93-year-old Nagash made wooden patterns for over 50 years and has them proudly displayed for visitors to see.
Fantastic.
For every component that needs to be cast, Negash has a pattern ready to make the mould.
Locomotive.
A vapore, sì.
Meanwhile, the oldest driver on the railway, Tesfaye Edigo, is a youngster at a mere 82, and his job is to drive the littorina railcar. This is the last working survivor of 9 supplied to the Italian regime here from 1934. In their prime, and with both motors running, they used to complete the journey from Massawa up to the capital in 3.5 hours against the steam train's 9 hours. Few places in the world could deliver such service in such style. They were well ahead of their time when first delivered, almost as exciting as the new architecture. The littorina crosses an up train in a faultless 70-year time warp. Not bad for Africa, nor indeed anywhere. Film producers, take note. The romantic aspects of the railway may be overwhelming to the visitor, but the real challenge is to create an updated transport link that will provide a much-needed boost to Eritrea's economy. Let's hope the income from steam tourism will help to make this possible.